This is Eric Van Buskirk. Let's continue to talk about how we can use the results from the research we did on Google's search engine result pages about entities and actually put the information into use by creating content with especially obviously a focus on writing, because if there's going to be, let's say, images used, that kind of follows on. So I'm really focused a bit more on the writing that can be done. And I think the method that I'm showing here, what I would say is that this is something that you would hand off to a writer or web page creator, and that you could give it to them in the form of notes, which is how I've done this here, and that's a lot of what I'm going to talk about in a minute. Or you could just sit down and obviously like discuss the notes with that person, because the notes that you're going to put here, I mean, they may not be enough detail, or the logic as to why you are writing something here may not be in enough detail, unless you really want to write a lot. Actually, an audio recording or even a desktop recording like I'm doing here might be a great way to explain to the person that's writing. Or if you're feeling up to the task of both the SEO and the writing, that may be the best of both worlds. So one of the things is that I looked at 15 of the landing pages that Google was ranking, and those were analyzed. Really, it should be more like 30. And I just today finished a pretty significant advancement with the software that I'm using to track all of this. So I think that that's going to make it much faster for me to do it using SEMrush's API. And you really, you need to look at, I believe, 30 landing pages to really, really see what's going on and make this semantic map a lot more accurate and rich. The other thing to understand here is, so this is the column that I think matters the most, which is as far as assigning these weights, it matters the most, because the higher the number means the more co-occurrences there were on these landing pages. So 12 was the biggest. That means out of about 15 landing pages, these words actually appeared on 12 of them. And what I did was I filtered out the ones, but they're still useful. It's just that this is where I'm making the notes, and I'm going to pull in the information from the ones, because yes, they do matter. Then I think that the two other metrics that really matter a lot to figure out how I want to structure what I'm writing is the search volume and the CPC. I probably could order them in either way, but just to help organize things, I decided to do it by cost per click. And this is a number here that is part of the data that came through with the SEMrush querying that I was doing. Search volume is great, but at the same time, it'd be nice to know the competition too, which, you could kind of, I think somewhere in here you could have the data for the competition. But to me, the cost people are paying, that tells you it's almost the same thing as competition. If someone's paying this much money, $15, what is LSI? Obviously, that's a very, competitive term. So let's see. So the other thing I would say is also add more weighting than I did here, just by the number of times we see something appear. So what I did is I in some of the notes I did have a mention of how many times something is seen in the keyword lists that I have here. The other thing we could do is we could find a way to really be sure that we're paying attention to how many times certain themes are appearing. I feel like there's a small enough data set here in terms of the number of words that I can pretty much eyeball that. However, there's some cases where I noticed that one theme appears a lot, even though one particular way of saying it doesn't get a very high score here. So that's actually really important. One keyword phrase may have a lot of co-occurrences, but there are other instances where it's just said in different ways and they appear in different ways. So you got to pay attention to that too. So let me move on to show you how I made some of these notes. So for example, here's some questions, and you want to make notes on the side here about the questions that people have. I notice for this particular core word that I'm researching, or I should say core entity, which is all about semantic search, all about the semantic web, there are a lot of questions. There are a lot of keyword phrases that have what is, define, those kinds of things. What that says to me is that there's a very big audience out there that is very new to these concepts. And if that audience matters to you, you're the one that's running the website, then think about that some of the fundamental questions need to be addressed. And definitely use the what is type terms and use the defining and all of that, and give some basic definitions somewhere here. In these notes, I have not really come to the point of, okay, this is first, this is second, this is third. That has to be done next. But one thing I think is really important to know is that I did not spend much time on this. This was maybe 30 to 45 minute exercise. The formatting, yes, that takes more time. Also, this is the first time that I've tried to go from the data and really boiling it down to what would be used to write and to create content. So yeah, I think in 45 minutes, a person could easily make the notes I made. And yes, there's more structure that needs to be made here if it's going to be handed off to somebody to write. But they probably also would have enough discretion from the person such as yourself to take the ball from here and organize from your notes and whatever additional information you give them with those notes. So let's look at some of the things that I am able to notice when I look at these. So, for example, when there was a core word, I put it here. It's, that's going to have to be treated separately. Obviously, these words are appearing a lot because there are different ways of saying really what I was looking for. In some cases here, they are the actual term that was searched to find the landing pages in Google. That doesn't really bias how many times the co-occurrence comes up because I didn't include when they appeared for the actual search. It was when they appeared for something else that was one of these main core search terms that I did that I found the 8 times. So, obviously you're going to want to organize these very fundamental, most important words. Technologies right here. I found that there's a lot of instances of the word technologies or technology. It's one of those cases, again, where maybe this isn't an 8, but when you think about all the different ways people mention technology and the semantic web, you want to write about that. And this is where you probably do want to string together some of those phrases that only occurred once. So I'm going to show them right here to you. And you'll see, for example, in bold, here are some of the places that the technology occurred. I would use those exactly as they are. I would have the person that's writing this try and include these words. And that's, it's maybe made too restrictive. It makes us think a little of like the keyword stuffing or something, or too much direction from an SEO. But it's going to produce the best results. And it's also going to be the most meaningful to users, as long as it doesn't look like you're writing to stuff in certain things. I also noticed, and you'll notice this later in the notes, that again, a lot of words relating to Web 3.0, quite a lot. So even though there's no one of them that appears 8 times or something, there's a lot of appearances like that. I also, while we're on this page showing the occurrences that only are once, meaning it's on the same page as a very highly ranked page for our entity, it only appeared on one of those ranking pages of the 15 we looked at. If I did 30, again, that's where these ones, the more important ones, would start popping into like 3 co-occurrences. But some of them are really important, like swoogle, apparently, I don't know, but the writer would want to look at that a little more. It's a search engine for semantic similarities. It does not use Google's algorithm, which I'm reverse engineering, so it's not seeing behind the wizard's curtain as I am to understand how to make the wizard happy and to basically, use what they've figured out, which is the most intelligent computer learning when it comes to the semantic web that's out there, for sure. There's no way some startup could be able to crawl co-occurrences as Google does. And I bolded a couple others here too to remind myself or to show people, that when they're writing it, they need to keep this in mind. And now going back to the main notations that I made here, again, core words, they're going to have to be discussed. And it's good to have, for the person writing, some of those key metrics here. There's a misspelling that really it should just be, grayed out. It's just not going to be important. It's not going to be used, obviously. SEO, just to mention that's got to be a topic of a few sentences, and I could go on to try and create more structure and say, let's talk about SEO in relation to the semantic web with at least, a paragraph of 4 sentences. The what is right here, here's again some of these words that are questions and defining. So let's define the semantic web, and perhaps let's do it this way because 5 times it occurred as defined semantic web. Internet 3.0, as mentioned, I made a note that it was occurring a lot, single times, and then this one is just the one that happened to appear twice. Here's a tool, and you've got 4 times that occurred. Here's a core word, another tool. So you've got 2 tools, and you want to, I would say, use the same wording for both of those as you're discussing them. Actually, here's another instance of a tool. So keep in mind, you want to try and keep some of these words really the same as they appear there, but this helps our weighting for the writer to be able to see how many times tool is appearing and how big that section or that portion should be. Search engines, I think it's important to notice that the idea of search engines is appearing in a number of places, and that we should talk about how searching for semantic associations is related to how searching with a search engine in general functions. So mentioning some of the similarities of how an algorithm looks at documents out on the web, for example. For this one, this has to do with applications, and I guess the intent of someone searching for this, although it's a very low search volume, could be that they're trying to find an application as in a program, a software program, and it is small volume. But another very important thing I would point out is that even though something is small volume, that's really not as important as the co-occurrence if you're trying to show a rich document that is including the most important ideas to, again, I guess I would say the wizard behind the curtain, which is to the Google algorithm. If you want them to see that you created this really rich document about what people care about, then even though it's low volume, if it appeared a lot, it's important. Maybe people don't even realize that it's so important to that concept. So you need to talk about it, even though it may be a small number of appearances. Having said that, I would also add that if your goal is more about just finding what topics people are searching for and ranking for them and just coming up high for these long tail words, well, no, maybe it doesn't matter so much that you rank for something that has many, many co-occurrences, but not so many people are searching. So you have to look at it from those 2 perspectives of, number one, you are doing this to rank high on the pages that you're creating, but also that the content is very useful and is very, something that people will want to look at for a long time and will share and will take further action on your website. Now, some more notes. Semantic web tutorial, talk a little bit more about this, educating people as to what all this means. Are there tutorials? People are specifically in at least 2 instances on these web pages. It's important that they're looking for a tutorial they can take. This one is a little bit strange to me. I don't know, and maybe by Google's examining all these, thousands of documents that contain these words, has not quite found a pattern to it. But I don't know whether that's webs is a sort of almost misspelling of the word web, Maybe Google would know because they see that a lot in other instances. Or is webs something else? Because there's another instance where actually it talks about webbing, and I looked it up, and it actually has to do with something that's not about the web. So even though it appears here, it's a different kind of semantic creation. They call it webbing, and I won't go into it more. So SEO indexing, just a couple times, but another way that we should talk about SEO up here, we saw that it's a topic that we want to at least touch on as related. The sophisticated users are using this acronym SW to represent semantic web. And interestingly, there's another instance, I believe, of this where the cost per click was actually quite high, and it was an instance where someone who was trying to attract traffic was smart enough to realize, oh, that's an intelligent search. That person knows about this, and that's my audience. I think it may have only appeared once, and that's why. Then we have, what else am I going to mention here? Only 2 times, but this is an important part of the semantic web. Tim Berners-Lee talked a lot about the meaning of what hyperlinks will do for people sharing documents across a network. The W3C, also another important concept, actually appears quite a bit more, and it's tied in since it's all about the beginning of the web and the governing body. Web semantics with a plural. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of times when people are using a plural there, and so I think that's important to remember to try and throw that into some of your writing. And so, I made a note to that effect. Here's another what is that appears a lot. And the volume, in the scheme of all of these, which are not very high in volume, it's okay. What is the semantic web? The is important, I believe, because it's saying that there's, and I noted this somewhere in my notes, it's saying that this is a proper name. It's a the. It's something that people have come together and given it defining characteristics. So to my mind, someone that's searching for the semantic web is more aware that it's something that's understood as having a definition, and there are common ways of describing it. Semantic web, people may not realize that this is talked about in a way that's pretty well understood and not just some completely amorphous concept. We have another tool here coming 4 times. Again, really low search volume, but isn't it interesting that it's actually a very important part of talking about our core. Now, okay, so a really big question comes up, of course, is that how many words can we write, do we want to write, and how many web pages? I think obviously this has a lot to do with your website or your client's website. And I would be inclined to say that if it's a really authority website that you can rank for, something like, I don't know, maybe LSI keywords, seems like it would be pretty competitive, or latent semantic indexing has decent volume, or what are some of the other bigger volume words here? They're quite low, as you can see. For what we're doing is a bit of a it's a niche area in a way, but I would do less pages and do your normal optimization for these, just having it in the title and having it as part of H1 header. Although honestly, you don't even have to do that to rank for it. Google is ranking, as many of you out there know, 1 page for dozens or even over 80 words. They may be long tail. If it's a really authoritative page, there'll be some of these competitive terms. In the past, 3 years ago, that did not happen. That would have to have been 5 different pages, and it could have been on that same authoritative website. So you don't need to create a lot of pages to do well here. I think that if your site is less authoritative, you might want to go for the bigger word that you can catch that's not crazy competitive, and write more so that you are able to catch some of the more long tail words. So I would say if I looked at 30 landing pages, and I should be careful. The word landing page, I'm using that to mean the page that Google is ranking. It's actually really a poor use of that term. It's the page that's been ranked by Google. If I had been examining 30 of these pages and the co-occurrences that appeared on there, there would be more words and you'd have more confidence, and you would have more to go from. So I would think you could do 4 or 5 web pages of anywhere from 250 to 500 words if you're going for 5 pages, and try and rank for some things that you think you can do with your normal SEO hat on. But know that because your content is so rich in aligning exactly with what Google's found to be relevant for the core, you're going to do better than your competition for the longer term keywords. If I haven't already had a chance to give you a quick demo, please give me a call, and I'd love to show you how these techniques work, and also, as is being discussed here, how the more highly structured logical data that comes back in the data chart from doing all the research can be translated into a digestible form for a writer and a content creator, since the two are quite different. Again, thanks very much.